Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this Seattle mayoral debate brought to you by King 5 and the Seattle Times. I'm Mimi Jung, along with Seattle Times City Hall reporter David Croman. On the podium tonight, incumbent Mayor Bruce Harrell and challenger Katie Wilson. In addition to his current term as mayor, Harrell served 3 terms on the Seattle City Council. His campaign this year largely focuses on affordable housing, community safety, and reliable transportation. Katie Wilson is the co-founder and executive director of the Transit Riders Union. If elected, she would be the 3rd woman to serve Seattle as mayor. Her campaign emphasizes homelessness, affordability, and a, quote, Trump-proof Seattle. Candidates, you will have 1 minute to deliver your opening statements. After each question, you will have 90 seconds to respond and are allowed 45 seconds for rebuttal. Once questioning has ended, you will both have 90 seconds to offer closing remarks. Mr. Harrell won a coin toss yesterday afternoon and has opted to deliver his opening statement second. So, Ms. Wilson, we'll begin with you. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. I'm running for mayor because I love this city, and I want it to be a place where my daughter can grow up and build a life if she wants to. Right now, though, that reality feels very far out of reach to so many of us, as basic costs from housing to childcare to groceries continue to climb. I've spent the last 14 years as a coalition builder and a community organizer, leading campaigns to win transformative victories that benefit working families across our region every single day, from higher wages to stronger renter protections to better public transit. Seattle is a great city, but we have a lot of problems to solve: homelessness, public safety, affordability. We can make progress, but not without new leadership in the mayor's office. After 7 months of campaigning, I feel profoundly hopeful for our future, because I know that my vision for Seattle is not just my vision. It's a vision shared by so many people around our city. It's our vision. I was honored to receive 51% of the vote in an 8-way primary, and I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve as your next mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Harrell, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Well, I entered public service to solve problems. It was really that easy, that simple. See, people like me have been historically kept out of power. I was born of very modest means. My mother was interned during World War II in a concentration camp. My father escaped the segregated South to come here to Seattle just to have a better life for his family. I attended public schools here, went to the University of Washington on a football scholarship, and then to law school. As your mayor, moving forward, we will invest over $1 billion in affordable housing and homelessness strategies. We are building one of the most effective public safety ecosystems here with good police officers, an unarmed response in our care department, and a world-class fire department. We're building a system where every child that goes to Seattle Public Schools can go to college for 2 years for free and pursue their dreams. We'll have 4,500 slots of child care and pre-K slots for young families. And with Trump threatening violence in our streets, there's no time for a learning curve. We have to fight.
Thank you. We're going to start tonight with a personal question for each of you, and we'll start with Mr. Harrell. You have said that you've said that Seattle wants a change agent in City Hall. As somebody who has been in City Hall for much of the last 2 decades, why should voters believe that you can be that person?
Well, they have to look at where we are and what I've done to do it. Again, I've prepared for this moment to fight Trump. I was the one that enacted the race and social justice legislation. I was the first one to come out supporting body cameras. I was the one that had come out with the new climate change policies that we see right now in our downtown city with our building emissions performance standard. I was the one that enacted the ban the box legislation, such that you cannot ask a person if they've committed a crime before a job application, because communities like mine have been boxed out and discriminated against. So what I've been able to do is to make sure that the city is on the right track. Make no mistake about this. This is a phenomenal city. We are leaders in biotech, high-tech, great university systems, maritime, port. And if you look at all of the people throughout this country and in our federal delegation and our local state leaders to support my candidacy right now, because this is when we need a fighter. We need a change agent. I've argued in front of state court, federal court. I just, the other day, a few weeks ago, we got out of the consent decree for our police department. So if you want change, that's been my life story. A lot of energy. And the fact of the matter is that you don't hear my administration talking about victory laps. We understand people are struggling to live in here. To live in Seattle. That's why we've put over $1 billion in affordable housing. That's why my budget has $350 million in affordable housing. That's how we were able to start the care department from scratch. That's a change agent, and that's what the people want.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. Ms. Wilson, you have no political experience, you don't have a college degree, and you have only managed a small nonprofit. Why should voters feel comfortable putting you at the helm of nearly 14,000 city employees?
Great question. Well, first of all, I would contest the notion that I have no political experience. I've spent 14 years working on City Hall from the outside as a coalition builder and a community organizer. So I am an outsider. I've never been an elected official, but I'm an outsider with an insider's experience of City Hall. I've been at the table when legislation was designed, when policies were implemented, when programs were hashed out. And that experience has given me an inside window into how City Hall works and how too often it fails to work for the people of this city. For example, back in 2020, I led on designing and passing the Jumpstart Payroll Expense Tax in partnership with Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda. That tax saved the city from devastating cuts during the pandemic, and it's allowed our current mayor to balance the budget for the last 4 years. And I'd also just like to level set. Seattle had a 3-term mayor once. His name was Charlie Royer. He came into office from being a news reporter with King TV. Our current mayor came into office from a council position where he managed a few employees. People come into the mayor's office from all kinds of directions, and ultimately, it's about building that team. It's about leadership. It's about assembling that team of people who are competent, who are skilled, who have the highest integrity, and orienting them around a vision and keeping them motivated. And that's the work that I've been doing for the last 14 years.
Thank you. We're going to start out with a few questions about affordability in Seattle. Seattle is one of the nation's most expensive cities to live in. What, in your definition, is the primary cause of Seattle's affordability crisis, and how, as mayor, can you reverse those trends? And we'll start with Mr. Harrell.
So one would have to take a course in macroeconomics to really understand what's happening here in the city. So income has not kept up with the cost of housing. It's strictly that easy. 20 years ago, the average cost of a house was around 2.4 times one's income. Now it's 9 to 10 times one income. We are living in a country where 36 to 42 million Americans are considered poor under federal standards. Yet we have over 2,000 billionaires. And so what's happened, the working class, the money is not going where it should. And the cost of housing, the tariff policy, interest rates are high. Now, what we're going to do about it is exactly what we're doing about it. And by the way, I've been working on housing issues for 30 years. As an attorney, I represented nonprofit housing developers, many around this town. I used to develop real estate investment trusts. So housing policy is I'm passionate about. And that is why, thanks to the voters, we proposed a $970 million levy that passed. That will keep 9,000 people in their homes from homelessness. It will build 3,100 new homes. We have $350 million in our budget right now for affordable housing. We have projects at Fort Lawton. We have projects, the Cortera project and the University Village. We have Jackson Park. I can go around the city and talk about the projects we're cutting tape on to get them done. And that's what we have to do, and that's what my proposed comp plan does as well. It sets us up for affordable housing.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson, how would you define Seattle's affordable housing crisis? What is behind that, and how can City Hall meaningfully reverse that trend?
Yeah. I definitely believe that the housing crisis is at the core of the affordability crisis that we're facing today. And really this goes back to a few things. So one is that we have a growing region, right? Seattle's been growing in population. We've had our tech boom. We've had people flowing into the region, especially higher paid workers. And our housing production has not kept pace with that growth for the last 20 years. And that drives up prices. We've also seen over the last decades federal disinvestment in affordable housing programs. And that's created this perfect storm where homelessness has gone up and up and up. So in terms of how we address this, we need to make it possible for the private market to build more housing in the great neighborhoods around our city. The city just passed the first stage of a comprehensive plan. And unfortunately, our current mayor's proposed plan does not allow for sufficient housing expansion around our city, which sets us up for continuing rent increases and house price increases in the years ahead. Another part of the solution is social housing, which Seattle voters have twice told us overwhelmingly that they want. They want the city to develop permanently affordable, publicly owned, mixed income housing. In cities around the world that have large affordable housing sectors, that keeps rents affordable not just for the people in that housing, but across the private market, because it means that private landlords have to compete with that public option. Unfortunately, our current mayor opposed funding for the new social housing developer this February. Those are two pieces of the answer, and we really need to address this crisis before families like mine are priced out of the city.
Thank you. Mr. Harrell, I want to give you a chance to respond to Ms. Wilson's allegations about the comprehensive plan and social housing.
There's a few things that's going on here, and I'm never quick to call someone dishonest. Perhaps they're making a mistake. But she repeatedly says I oppose Social Housing Corporation, and I tried to tell her last night at a debate to tell my opponent that there's no record that I ever posted. But yet she misleads people to say that I had a different model to fund it. In fact, we've advanced $800,000 for this entity to succeed. We are negotiating a $2 million for it to succeed. There's absolutely no indication for that. But it goes worse. Even at yesterday's debate, she said, for example, I had lowered funding in LEAD, which is a law enforcement diversion program. Absolutely untrue, a flat-out lie. So when I talk about our comp plan, for example, I have put it out there, 330,000 units. That's more than twice the old comp plan to accommodate growth. And my opponent talks about we could do more, but she never specifies a number. So this misleading characterization really needs to stop.
Ms. Wilson, I'm going to give you 45 more seconds to respond to that, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Sure, yeah. So our current mayor's face was all over mailers that went out this February supporting an alternative to the measure that would have funded the social housing developer, an alternative that did not provide a new funding source, that took money away from other affordable housing, essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul, and that also restricted the income to 80% AMI and below, which basically is not the mixed income social housing model that voters had approved the year before. So I think that qualifies as opposing social housing. In terms of specifically how we can do better on the comprehensive plan, just to give one example, the definition of what housing is near transit, right? Most of the multifamily apartment-style development allowed in the plan is going to be concentrated on noisy, dangerous arterials. We need a more expansive definition of near transit so that we can get more housing within that 5-minute walk shed.
Thank you.
I want to move on to the topic of small businesses in the city. A well-known Seattle chef recently warned that rising costs are driving out the unique restaurants that give the city its character, saying that soon we'll be left with large owners controlling most of the market. He suggested solutions like a cap on commercial rent, taxing major corporations, and reviewing the tip credit. As mayor, what are some ideas you have to relieve the pressure on small businesses and prevent restaurants from leaving the city? Ms. Wilson, I'll start with you. You have 90 seconds.
So I think it would be very interesting to look at commercial rent regulation or capping commercial rents. That's something that the city actually does have the power to do. I've been talking with small business owners around the city in the course of this campaign, and it is clear that they are struggling, right? The costs of everything are so high. One thing I would like to do is look at ways that the city can streamline, simplify, and make less expensive the process of starting a small business in Seattle. I've talked to too many small business owners who thought that the process of opening up might take, a year, and they saved for that. And then because of factors out of their control, having to do with all of the different agencies that you have to interface with, different forms and permits that you have to get, that process stretched on much longer, and they weren't actually able to open the business. I think that sorry, I lost my train of thought. The other thing is that the housing crisis is such a big fundamental part of why businesses are struggling as well. It's part of what contributes to high labor costs, right? So we have a high minimum wage, and that's partly because housing costs are so high, and we have that cost of living adjustment every year with the minimum wage. And so the more we can do to make it possible for workers to live in the neighborhoods where they work instead of commuting in long distances, the easier it will be for restaurants and small businesses to hire and retain good staff.
Mr. Harrell, what are some ideas that you have to keep these small businesses in our city?
Well, it's important to know, once again, I've been working for small business. I've owned the small businesses downtown. I have a lot of clients for small businesses. We're doing some phenomenal work with small businesses, but we have to recognize, particularly in the restaurants, how thin their margins are. That's why we propose the most progressive B&O tax, giving 90% of the businesses a tax break, only taxing the highest earners such as Microsoft or Amazon. Amazon's profits were $60 billion last year. They were $30 billion before. So that's how our tax policy has been. When you look at many of the programs we are running right now, the Capital Access Program, 300 businesses, we gave $70 million on what we call a capital paydown program, where we covered 20% of their loan principal to make sure that they can survive. We also have the Business Community Ownership Fund. And this is phenomenal. This is how businesses could actually buy their lease such that they are not subject to the landlord's discretion. We have the Liberty Project, where we're using University of Washington grad students and Seattle University grad students and Tabor 100, a small chamber of commerce, to give these restaurants access to capital, strategic planning, human resource development, social media skills. We're doing a lot, but we have to remember our charter responsibility is to make sure they're safe. And so when my opponent, who has zero background in public safety, has to realize these businesses want it to be safe for their patrons to come in, such that they can get to work on time. The permit process, I'll close with that, is a phenomenal part that we could do. And we've done amazing work expediting the permit process such that they could open the doors.
And Ms. Wilson, you talked about permitting process, making it less expensive for businesses to open. What do you think about Mr. Harrell's ideas?
Well, let's talk about public safety, because this is a recurring theme as I've been talking with small business owners around the city. The homelessness crisis and the aspects of the public safety crisis that are related to homelessness are a huge impediment, right? When there are people who have no place to go, no place to sleep, sleeping in the doorway of a small business, maybe having a mental health crisis, maybe addicted to drugs, that really causes problems for their business. And the fact is that we have thousands more people sleeping unsheltered on the street today than we did 4 years ago. We have less shelter capacity than we did 4 years ago. And our current mayor's policy is basically to move people around the city, to sweep them around the city without meaningful offers of shelter and support. And that is harming our small businesses in neighborhoods across the city.
You have 45 seconds to respond to that.
You know, every question, my opponent tries to bring it back to the homelessness issue. But what my opponent fails to understand, the number which she has no plan at all. She never talks about how much her plan would cost. But homelessness in this country has gone up 18%. We have to understand that almost 1 million people are unhoused. Homelessness in the state has gone up. Homelessness in the county has gone up. This is a crisis situation. And year after year, we keep budgeting for it. The answer has to be a regional solution. The fact is the people in Seattle, 70%, 70 of the people we're treating that are unhoused do not become unhoused in the city of Seattle. We offered 2,204 accepted shelter referrals 2 years ago, and the same amount the following year. It is a serious crisis, but I will tell you the solutions are found in a regional approach, one that I continue to support.
Thank you, and we will get more into the homelessness issue here, as well as public safety acts as a good segue right now, which is the Seattle Police Department. And looking at the past 4 years, we've seen lawsuits exchanged and turnover in leadership, and a lot of changes, particularly at the top of the Seattle Police Department. And so, Mr. Harrell, I want to hear from you. Is the Seattle Police Department succeeding today despite all of that? And what changes should be made in the future?
It is succeeding. Number one is, I have 14,000 employees. I had to make the decision to terminate a chief of police. I have now a superstar. He could work for any department in this country, and Chief Sean Barnes, who's a PhD, he's a Marine, he's smart, and he has a great command team. The fact of the matter is that when I became mayor, we had lost over 300 officers. And the repercussions from my opponent's defund movement cost us a lot of officers, cost us morale. So we've been rebuilding a system. Homicides are down over 40%. Shots fired are down. Serious crimes are down. Property crimes are down. We are trending in the right direction. But when you lose 1/5 of your department, we have 5 precincts. That's operating with 4 precincts. We didn't make any excuses. We started recruiting the right kinds of officers. And right now, under our leadership, we're getting 10 applications a day. We're getting 4,000 a year. This is the go-to place for good police officers. And we created from scratch the care department, who are responding to thousands of calls. We are a model for what good policing looks like. And because our use of force now is less than 1%, a national best, the Judge Robar terminated the consent decree. So we have a bright future in front of our officers. But yes, my opponent has never hired one employee. My opponent has no background in public safety, except arguing to defund it. So if you want to move forward with a great police department, the choice should be clear in this race.
I want to give Ms. Wilson a chance to respond, of course, but I wanted to follow up on the decision to fire the police chief that you mentioned, Adrian Diaz. You also hired him to begin with. Was that a mistake in the first place?
We have to understand, he was the chief when I was elected. Let's level set. He was the chief, and I worked with him as a colleague when he was on the department.
He was the interim chief, and then you gave him the permanent chief job.
And we did a national search. And of the national search, I was given 3 candidates. He was the best of the national search. And that's the decision that I made, and I own that decision. But the chief, based on investigations that were done, started making decisions that were unacceptable to me. And that's what a leader does. When you have actual hiring experience, you're not going to get it right all the time. I try to lead with compassion and empathy. So I made a decision to look for another chief. And look what we have, Chief Sean Barnes and his command staff. So we're moving forward. And that should be a good thing for the city, and we should be proud of that.
Ms. Wilson, I'd like you to respond to what Mr. Harrell said before, but also your assessment of where the police department is at today.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of work yet to do. So if you look at Seattle's crime trends compared to national trends over the mayor's term, we've had excess violent crime. We're also spending more than 2 times per officer than Boston, and that's not a difference in pay. That's our overall police budget. So there's a question of whether we're spending our money wisely. And the mayor's assessment of his decision to hire Diaz is not what I've heard, right? Diaz was hired over other qualified internal applicants. And the mayor stood by him for far too long while morale tanked and we lost good career, high integrity officers. We're not doing community policing, and we're not following best practices on gun violence. That's the result of an audit that came out last year. And our mayor talked about high standards for our incoming officers. He worked with our council president, Sarah Nelson, to try to lower standards for officer hiring. So we have a long way to go, and that includes bargaining the police contract to make more progress on accountability. He mentioned the consent decree, but we still have a long way to go on police accountability. We have a 2017 accountability ordinance, major parts of which have still not been implemented because they were bargained away in the police contract. So no, we are not making the progress that we need to with our police department.
And Ms. Wilson, I wanted to follow up on Mr. Harrell's statement about your support for a budget proposal in 2020 that would have seen cuts to the police department of up to 50%. Can you speak to your support to that? And is that something that you still support? Where is your head today?
Yeah, I think I've been very clear in this campaign that I support a police department that is adequately staffed, that is responsive, and that is accountable to the communities that it served. In 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, we had a very contentious public conversation around the country about community safety and policing. I participated in that conversation, and also I have learned a lot since then. And I'm proud of what I've learned. I've been having a lot of conversations about public safety with former officers, with other people in the public safety space. And I'm very confident that we can make progress on these very difficult issues, and we can create a city that is safe for everyone.
So you aren't arguing that that is something you said 5 years ago. You have since learned a lot more, as you said. What changed your mind?
I think, the conversation back then, and honestly, we've made a lot of progress based on that conversation, right? The fact that we're having a conversation now about roles that police are playing that we don't actually need a sworn officer for, everything from crisis response to taking down reports of property crime, right? That conversation was really elevated at that time. And I think part of what that movement got wrong is that we thought, well, because half of calls don't need an armed response, maybe we only need half as many police officers. But the fact is that a police department has to respond to incredibly complicated situations, an active shooter situation, for example, right? We can't just scale down the size of the police department based on the calls that we think can be taken by alternative responders. So that's just one thing that I think was not well understood by that movement at that time.
Mr. Harrell, go ahead.
Sure. My opponent talked about we had discussions after George Floyd was murdered. We attended hundreds of discussions. We marched on the streets. I did not see my opponent at any of those discussions because had she been at the real discussions, we would have said, as in the black and brown community, our community would suffer the most if we defund. My opponent, in all due respect, doesn't know anything about public safety. She's holding up Boston as a model. The fact is Boston is smaller than Seattle. They have over 2,000 officers at Boston. That's a 3-to-1 ratio. I talk about a 1.9 to 1,000 ratio. My opponent will never commit to what adequate staffing means. As opposed to what? Inadequate staffing? So I'm glad my opponent has become enlightened, but someone should have said, wait a minute, our community will suffer the most without police
Time is up.
officers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. Let's talk about crime. While overall crime and 911 calls are down on 3rd Avenue and the Little Saigon neighborhood of Chinatown International District, those areas continue to have significant public safety issues like open-air drug use and violence. Many people who live and work in that neighborhood in those areas say not enough is being done. So what do you think has not worked in the city's approach, and what new strategies would you pursue to make these areas safer and restore public confidence? Ms. Wilson, I'll start with you.
Yeah, and I've been doing community walks in a lot of neighborhoods around the city, including downtown with the Downtown Community Council, on Capitol Hill with business owners and property owners, and in the Chinatown International District. And it's true that we still have some real hot spots where there's drug activity, where there's other illicit activity. And one of the things that I've heard both from folks who live in the neighborhood and also from people who are on the street outreach teams, right? Because we do have a number of nonprofits that do outreach to people, trying to get them, services. And often the police are kind of MIA. And it's weird to be the one in this race saying this, but I really think that we need a more consistent police presence around some of these hotspots that can prevent them from forming in the first place. Because once you have 30 or 40 people on the sidewalk, doing whatever they're doing, non-police outreach teams can't really do very much. And so there's really, I feel like sometimes we take this all or nothing approach to policing, where it's either officers sitting in their patrol cars or we're arresting everyone and throwing them in jail, which we know that also doesn't work. So there needs to be more of this consistent on-the-ground presence where police are working with non-police responders, with stakeholders in the neighborhood, business owners, to take more of a problem-solving approach when there are problems in a particular neighborhood. So I think we can do a lot better using the police force that we have and the resources we have to address these problems more effectively. And also, this also is related to our response to the homelessness crisis, and we need to do better there too.
Thank you. Mr. Harrell, your answer to that question?
Sure. Well, I don't have to walk those areas. I'm from those areas, 3 generations from that area, 12th and Jackson as an example. You saw that we arrested 14 of the most prolific drug dealers there, and we seized $3 million worth of drugs, which is enough to kill Seattle twice. You see a very aggressive approach when we have to make arrests. But you also see a compassionate approach. People are killing themselves with fentanyl, which you could get for less than 50 cents. That is a health issue. And so if you look at under our administration, we tripled our investments in health strategies. We reduced fentanyl deaths by over 30% or so. So we will continue to double down on what we're doing, but the problem is we don't have anywhere to take them to get help. And we looked at the ecosystem. What we've developed is, you see the county passed a crisis care center. That's a good thing. We invested in the Star Center and the Orca Center. So we're now investing in a place where we could take them to get treatment. So our calibration is the right calibration. And if you really study criminology and you look at the intersectionality between health and public safety, you can't use a public safety approach when people are dying on the streets. This takes time. You're talking about generational poverty, you're talking about generational discrimination. And so what we're doing is what we should be doing, helping each one, getting to know them by name. That is our approach. This is tough work. And again, having some of the budget challenges we're doing, we still figured out a way to triple our investments to save lives. Our fire department is the first one to administer buprenorphine to save lives. So we're setting a national model on what we should be doing in this space.
I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you can go out and with your own eyes see that what we're doing right now is not working. And, part of this, the mayor mentioned that the question is, where do you send someone? Is there treatment, right? But also the question is, where do they go after treatment? Because if someone goes to treatment and then they're back out on the street, they're just going to be engaging in the same behavior. So this goes back to our homelessness crisis, and it also goes back to funding for the LEAD program, law enforcement assisted diversion, right? And so, when someone is arrested, if we're going to divert them into a path where they're getting housing and shelter with services, because we know that just arresting someone, booking them into jail, and putting them back out on the street doesn't work, we actually need to be funding those programs where people are getting that long-term case management and help that we need, and that just has not been a priority of this administration.
Would you like to respond to that not being
Sure.
priority?
Once again, she's completely obliterating the facts. The founder of LEAD, Lisa Dugard certainly supports my reelection. If you look at in 2022, we only invested $6.6 million. That was the budget I inherited. Under our leadership, we invested in 2025 $14.5 million, and this is the highest they've ever received. We also made sure that they were Trump-proofed in case they lose federal funds or some state funds, made sure we're supporting that approach. So we are modeling what you have to do on the softer approach, the upstream. One of the reasons why we put the education levy on the books and why we're doing so much in pre-K and child care is because brain development between 0 and 4 affects them when they're in the life. A lot of these folks need help. So our investment strategy is aligned with best practices to get people the treatment that they need.
Thank you. The city has had consistent budget problems and is forecasted to have them again in the future. For example, in 2027, the forecasted deficit is $140 million. There was a deficit this year. There was a deficit the year before. What is the solution in either your second term or your first term, and does that involve new taxes? Mr. Harrell, we'll start with you.
Sure, it absolutely does involve new taxes, and my opponent will be quick to talk about progressive taxes. The B&O tax policy, which is probably the smartest policy that the city has seen in terms of taxing the big corporations, was designed again to have more of a progressive approach to what we're trying to do. We also have to look at efficiencies in government. I believe in our next term, we will come up with ideas that we actually have white papers on how to reinvent a leaner, more effective and efficient government as well. So it has to be twofold. Yes, revenues and taxes, but we also have to use our money wisely. The fact is, my opponent, she has no budget experience. My opponent ran a $200,000 budget. Last year they lost $21,000. The year before, $38,000. The year before, $46,000. Zero budget experience, and I think yesterday she said that that's what nonprofits do. That is not. A key performance indicator on any organization should have 3 times the capital in the bank. This is big stuff. These are big challenges that we're dealing with. And I've looked at 15 budgets for the city of Seattle. And every year that I've been mayor, I've proposed a balanced budget because we know how to do this. We will look at progressive taxes, of course, but we'd also look at business efficiencies.
Ms. Wilson, to you responding to Mr. Harrell as well as your plan for the budget coming into the mayor's office.
Yeah, so I'm proud of the work that I did on the city budget in 2020 on the Jumpstart tax, which again was the reason why the mayor's been able to balance his budget for the last 4 years. And then in 2023, I served on the Seattle Revenue Stabilization Work Group, which was tasked with researching the city's progressive revenue options because we already knew in 2023 that we had a massive structural budget shortfall widening. The work group came out with a report, and I and the Transit Riders Union also published a report with a more extensive list of progressive revenue options. Unfortunately, the mayor's office did nothing with that information, and 2 years later, we had a $250 million shortfall. Now, the B&O tax restructure that the mayor mentioned and that will be on the ballot this fall was actually one of the options in the report that I authored in 2023. So I'm very glad that that is now being used. But it's a couple years too late. And frankly, the budget that the mayor has proposed this year, he talked about a leaner budget, but actually there's a lot of additional one-time spending. Now, a lot of it's good stuff, right? It's an election year. He wants to give his people things. I mean, for example, right, the Lake City Farmers Market, Fresh Bucks program, really great programs, and there's additional money in there for them. But that is one-time money. So the mayor is setting up the next mayor for a fiscal cliff in the next budget where those programs are not going to be able to continue with the current funding scenario. So going forward, we do need to raise new progressive revenue. I support a local capital gains tax. There are several other options in my platform that the city needs to work on developing. And also we need to work at the state level to get more progressive revenue so that we can fund the vital goods and services we depend on.
Mr. Harrell, would you like to respond?
Well, I'm still sort of jarred by her statement, we are giving his people things. I just hope and pray she's not referring to the $80 million reparations package, housing package, anti-gentrification package that I did announce that she does not support. The fact is the Progressive Revenue Task Force that she served on, and I thank you for your service, is the one I convened. And when they had come back with several progressive taxes, income tax, inheritance tax, estate tax, a progressive real estate tax, none of those could be done. They just can't be done. It has to be done in state law. She talks about, my opponent talks about a vacancy tax. That is not a very successful tax. My opponent talks about a capital gains tax. Would be the first city to do that. We've studied that. That could be gained. It doesn't raise a lot of money. So what we've done is this, we've taken a very thoughtful approach to the B&O tax policy we put forth, and we will always take advantage of the progressive real estate, progressive taxes. but we don't have the tools given by the state.
I do want to follow up on the B&O tax because you're right, it does shift a lot of the burden off of small businesses, but because it's based on gross receipts and not income, there are grocery stores that run on very thin margins that are concerned that this new proposal will make an already difficult financial situation more difficult. Both of you have spoken in support of this. I'm curious to hear both of your response to those concerns from thin profit, thin margin businesses. And start with Mr. Harrell.
Sure. What I have my team working on right now is legislation on a state basis. And again, my last answer is saying that the state has only given us so many tools. We have to understand that. What we're looking at right now is legislation to exempt grocery stores from the B&O tax and from any other taxes that could be especially applied to them, such that they can have relief. We realize many of them, for a variety of reasons, have thin margins as well. So that's one thing we could do immediately. We're also making sure that our zoning scheme, where there's a grocery store, making sure that the zoning scheme is such that they can be very, let me back up. The restrictive covenants that we eradicated to make sure that large companies go, that another one can come in and they can't restrict it. And that was a practice they were doing to make sure that competitors are going somewhere else. And so there's a lot of creative things we're doing.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson, can you speak to the concerns of the thin profit margin businesses about the B&O tax proposal?
Yeah, and I mean, it's no question that the B&O tax is not a perfect tool, right? And we have imperfect tools. You know, there actually is something, and this again is in that report that I referred to from 2023 that I authored. There is potentially a way that we can restructure our B&O tax to make it more progressive in that sense by allowing businesses to deduct the cost of goods sold. And there's some complications there because it's hard to figure what the revenue will be. But there is potentially something we can do here in Seattle that I want to look at. And then again, there are additional progressive taxes that wouldn't have that effect that I think the city should explore. A vacancy tax, I actually think that there is a legal way that we can do that. A digital ad tax is another one that I want the city to explore. So we need to look at other options as well. And yes, absolutely, let's work at the state level to try to improve the tools that we have.
Thank you.
I want to loop back to the topic of homelessness. The city has seen a record number of encampments being removed, but many people return to the streets because of limited shelters and housing options. And some people are refusing service altogether. Do you believe encampment removals are an effective strategy? If not, what sort of approach should the city take instead? Ms. Wilson, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so we know what works, right? During the pandemic, there was a program called Just Care, where several nonprofits teamed up, and they resolved encampments by getting people into emergency housing and shelter with the support that they need to be successful there. That program wound down due to loss of funding, but it was continued by the state in their right-of-way program, which resolved encampments on state highway land. And you know, we know that this works, right? So you can resolve an encampment and actually get people inside instead of merely pushing them around the city, which is exactly what our current mayor is doing. And now the city is not using that model. And actually, the Downtown Seattle Association is starting to explore doing that model themselves. And we really need to scale that up because that is what works. Right now, we have the Seattle Times just reported on it today, right? Seattle residents are reporting more encampments than ever before, 50,000 in the first 8 months of this year. I'm talking to people around the city, and they know. They say, okay, there's an encampment in my park. I don't like it. The city's going to sweep it next week, and I know they're going to be back the week after. So what we're doing now is not working. We need to be actually getting people inside, and that means massively expanding our emergency housing and shelter, something which the current mayor has put no focus on. And in fact, he's obstructed it. There's a tiny house village, Brighton Tiny House Village, that Nicholsville has been trying to open for 3 years, and our current mayor has done nothing but put obstacles in its way.
Mr. Harrell?
Her facts are baseless. Number one, you have to look at, first of all, let's acknowledge the gravity of the problem. It is a huge problem. Under our administration, we've opened 2,000 emergency units. We have 1,000 underway, but I got to make this clear. When 100% of all city-funded shelters are enhanced shelters, you have to give them supporting. I don't want to stick someone in a tent or a tiny home and not give them wraparound services. I'm playing what we call the long game for their lives to shelter them, number one. Number two, if you look at the people that are 50%, we have a 50% increase in the people we've taken out of shelter and put them in a housing. That's a huge increase. That's way above the national average and the county average. If you look at in 2023, we had 2,204 accepted shelter referrals, about a similar number the year after. Now, make no mistake about this. When I said 70% of the people in Seattle who are unhoused are not coming from the city. They're coming from elsewhere. I've been working on these issues. My wife, too, is former CEO of United Way in Health and Human Services space. We've been working on this issue a long time. I said earlier that in America, we almost have 1 million people that are homeless. This is tough work, and it's easy to be on the sideline and criticize. Her plan for 4,000 emergency shelter units, it cannot be funded. And by the way, there's absolutely no plan for that. She will never talk about how much that will cost. So we will do everything humanly possible, leading with empathy, trying to shelter people, and it's offensive to think that I would do this in an inhumane way. And I must say this, too. 80% of the cabins have been removed from parks.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. Ms. Wilson, I want to ask you about that. How would you fund creating 4,000 new units of emergency housing in 4 years? And in addition, you have said that one of the ideas is to take some affordable housing units. A lot of studio apartments, one-bedrooms are vacant right now. Yeah. And you have talked about making those available to people who are homeless. So a twofold question: how do you respond to the funding of the 4,000 units? And also, how would you fund the other option?
Sure. So, and that is part of the 4,000 units, to be clear. So when I'm thinking about 4,000 units, and also to be clear, the reason I'm talking about 4,000 units is because that is what we need, right? And we need to start talking about what we need to actually end unsheltered homelessness in Seattle, because right now it feels like we've given up. So the funding is, so there's going to be a portion of this, probably about 1,000 units, I envision being tiny houses and micro-modular shelter, which is the kind of shelter that unsheltered homeless folks eagerly ask for, right? This works. And then, yes, we have large vacancies across the affordable housing sector, also in MFTE units. And so I envision the city buying down the rents in those units so that we can get people inside. This is going to be a combination of using existing funding differently and seeking new funding locally and seeking new funding from the state level. So it's going to be a mixture of funding sources.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Harrell, do you have a response to that?
There's no price. There's no price. The only way that can be achieved, and we would love to do that, by the way, tiny homes, we just invested in 100 tiny homes. That was $6 million. The only way is to take money from affordable housing. And we're focusing in on the teacher and the social worker and the barista to make sure they could live here. There's no funding for that. The regional approach. Remember, 85% of all those tiny homes in the county are in Seattle. 63% of all the shelter in the county are in Seattle. We are trying to do our share, but I'm not getting the participation from the other cities. They put in zero on this regional approach, and that's why I say that the solution to homelessness is a true regional approach that we haven't yet achieved. But just last week, I made a motion for that organization to become regional, and that's the work we're going to do to solve homelessness.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to transportation and Sound Transit. Sound Transit's long-term costs are expected to balloon by as much as $30 billion, leading some to question whether the proposed West Seattle to Ballard line can be completed. Both of you have said you want to complete that line, but what can you as mayor do to make this happen? And could that include perhaps a Seattle-specific tax or approach to make that happen separate from Sound Transit? And we'll start with Mr. Harrell.
So that's really not on the table, the Seattle approach. I want to deliver to West Seattle and Ballard what the voters were promised, and that is light rail to Ballard and West Seattle. So what we've done is we looked at it, and we've actually hired a former deputy director of Sound Transit and an interim director of that $50 billion organization, Brooke Bellman, who's starting on my administration as we speak. So what we're doing is we've staffed it up. A Sound Transit civic projects, much like we managed a waterfront, which is beautiful by any standards, we're staffing up to make sure that we could save as much money as possible. And we're going to show the other cities, the other jurisdictions on Sound Transit. I sit on the System Expansion Committee. I sit on the Executive Board. We're making sure that light rail will get there, number one, but we'll do everything possible to cut the red tape. And eventually that saves hundreds of millions of dollars if we do it the right way, and that's what we're doing right now.
Ms. Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'll say that the current administration has not done nearly what they could in terms of streamlining permitting and making it easier for Sound Transit projects within Seattle to move forward in a timely manner. The city also needs to take more of a lead on planning within the city, including using the city's right-of-way so that we're not cobbling together private properties that are very expensive and also take a long time to be able to build. So there's actually a lot more that the city can do to pave the way for less expensive and faster construction of our light rail lines. The fact is that the budget shortfall at Sound Transit is so large that that is going to force the tough decisions that the mayor does not want to admit we're going to have to make about the lines to Ballard and West Seattle. For that reason, I do think that we need to look at seeking new funding, whether that is at the state level. We can also consider, this would be a big public conversation, but within the city, we have a monorail funding authority that is unused. It would require a state law change, but we could repurpose that for funding within the city for those light rail projects so that we could actually build them out to their full extent. That is certainly a conversation I think that it makes sense to have.
And Mr. Harrell respond that you haven't done enough, and to her suggestion that Seattle might need to raise some of its own money.
Well, you know, she talked about bonding in another project. I'm afraid of her fiscal analysis that we don't want to use monorail capacity. That didn't work out well in our history. State level funding, yes. We need federal funding. The fact is, the matter is we have not a good president right now, but federal funding this is the largest light rail project in the country right now at $53.8 billion. So again, I don't think my opponent has a appreciation for all of the work that all of our city employees are doing. We have 50 people, 50 full-time employees working on this issue as we speak. So we will do everything possible to make sure we get light rail in Ballard and West Seattle, and I've been a champion in that. Passed a resolution just a few weeks ago making sure that as we protect the full spine, that Ballard and West Seattle's voices are heard.
Thank you.
Just this week, the Trump administration announced that he is deploying National Guard troops to Portland to protect ICE facilities. So if the Trump administration decides to send troops here to Seattle, how would you respond as mayor? Ms. Wilson?
Yeah. I think the first thing to say is that we need to be united. Trump picks on the weak. The city needs to be working in lockstep with the county, with the state, and as mayor, I will be working hand in hand with our city attorney, with our attorney general, and with our governor to make sure that we are keeping Seattle safe. That means fighting with every legal tool that we have at our disposal. And that means coordinating, communicating with mayors in cities around the country that have already faced the threat of federal agents coming into their city, learning from their experience, learning from their lawsuits, and standing together. That also means that the city needs to coordinate closely with organizations in Seattle that are rooted in immigrant communities, that are rooted in our LGBTQ+ community, and make sure that if those federal troops do come in, that we are coordinated in our response. We are de-escalating, and we are not giving Trump the chance to do harm to the residents of Seattle.
Mr. Harrell, how would you respond?
Actually, that was a good answer. That was a strong answer. And that's exactly what we're doing. So when I meet with Governor Bob Ferguson and I meet with Attorney General Nick Brown, both of them who support my reelection. I meet with Senator Cantwell, as I did last weekend. I meet with Congresswoman Jayapal or Congressman Adam Smith, all of whom support my reelection. We are united. That we have to recognize that 140,000 Seattle residents are foreign-born, that what Trump is doing is violating due process. So we are strong, we are united. I pulled together community-based organizations such as One America and many of people from different communities to make sure that we put in legal money for legal services for them. I have the superstar in the state, Hamdi Mohammed, my Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. We increased her budget by 70%, making sure that, again, they have immigrants have legal services and translation services and the support that they need. And make no mistake about this, this is personal for me. My mother was interned through an executive order. I know how inhumane violations of due process is. This triggers me. And what we need is a mayor that has that kind of tenacity to stand up to a bully like Trump. Trump walks all over inexperience. So that's what we're doing, and that's what we'll continue to do.
I'd like to give you time for rebuttal if you choose.
I'll just say that what I wouldn't do as mayor is pass legislation that massively expands surveillance throughout our city, which is what our current mayor just did. This is legislation that will expand CCTV cameras, that could potentially be taken control of by the Trump administration. And this is legislation that was opposed by immigrants' rights groups, by civil liberties groups, and by the member of color caucus in the legislature. And I'll quote from their letter. This technology, and technology similar to it, has recently been in the news for its failure to be meaningfully and consistently secured, leading to breaches that could result in sensitive data being shared by ICE and putting our immigrant and refugee communities at risk. So that is a kind of risk that I would not take.
Mr. Harrell, 45 seconds to respond to the cameras.
Do you think Trump cares about those cameras? See, this is exactly what I'm talking about, a lack of experience. We will not give that to Trump. We have the safeguards in place. If you look at the safeguards in place, only 28 people have access to it. Not one city has been subpoenaed, have given that information to ICE. Not one. Now, if you look at the Keep Washington Working Act, that gives us insulation from having to prove it. And I've said publicly, if they try to get it, we'll shut it down. I'll tell you who I've talked to. I talked to the father of the son who was killed at Garfield. I talked to the mother of the daughter that was shot at a bus station. I talked to the daycare center owner whose bullets fly over, who all support this technology. I'm protecting our community. That's who I've talked to.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. And we have come to the conclusion of the debate tonight. So each of you now have 1 minute to deliver your closing statement. Ms. Wilson, we'll start with you. You have 90 seconds.
For the last 7 months, I've been all around this city, talking with small business owners, community leaders, public servants. A recurring theme of those conversations is that they see a failure of leadership from our city. When I talk to these leaders, they tell me about the people they serve, the businesses they run, and the communities they're a part of. You know what they don't do? They don't brag about the number of employees they have. They don't compare the size of their budget with the leader sitting next to them. They don't pretend to have successes when there is clear evidence of failure all around them. I got into this race because I saw our mayor side with rich corporate donors to try to derail social housing. Those are the same people who are going to try to buy this race with $1 million of attack ads over the next month. Sometimes in the face of that, it feels like we don't really have power. I know that feeling. But I've seen the power that people have when you give them a real choice. When you meet their hope with collaboration, action, and plans, not excuses. In this election, you have a choice between the status quo and someone who will fight for change. I've made a career working for regular people and getting results. If elected, I will continue that work from the mayor's office. This is your city. Let's make it work for all of us.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson, and Mr. Harrell, to you. Closing statements.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, you know, as mayor, I've tried to lead this city with clear values based on my personal life, my personal experiences. I've tried to lead with honesty and integrity, with kindness and strength. I want all of our children to be able to afford living here, like my mom and dad when they were young. I want them to be safe and have an opportunity to thrive and be whoever and whatever they could be. But I recognize there's still so much work to do. Last night, my opponent said it was never her intent to run for public office, and it shows. She did not prepare for this moment. Her record is abysmal in terms of public safety. I've prepared for this moment. My opponent has never hired one employee. My opponent has never balanced a budget. My opponent quit college 6 weeks before graduating and had 6 jobs in 10 years. That is not preparing for the moment we're in front of us right now. Trump will walk all over inexperience. The fact is that we will continue investing in affordable housing. She has no housing experience. We will invest in diverse communities, and we won't take credit for the work of others. When she said she designed and passed Jumpstart, she didn't pass anything. The council passed it. The choice is right. She's right about that. My opponent's right. Do you want someone that just years ago was advocating defunding the police department, or someone that knows how to build one of the safest systems here in the city? I'm endorsed by Governor Bob Ferguson, Governors Inslee, Gregoire, and Locke, Attorney General Brown, Senator Cantwell, and you look at Democrats throughout the country supported my reelection. I asked for 4 more years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Thank you for a great conversation tonight. And thank you for joining us for this Seattle mayoral debate brought to you by King 5 and the Seattle Times. Good night.